All right, let's talk about the 80s era of fragrance. Now, this is one of my favorite eras because in the 80s, you had your dry, rich, macho scents that kicked you in the nose. Like, this is where in the 80s, we had the aromatic fougere of Drakkar. Now, this was a panty dropper until like the early 90s. And some people, it still will be. But this is where the aromatic fougere element of this kind of fragrance, they'll always have some popularity with people. But a lot of the 80s scents, they had that rich vetiver and spice and dry wood and the macho, in your face kind of quality. Now, then in the 90s, they started pioneering, in the late 80s, we had a few things. We had Cool Water and we had Joe Pomme. Now, what are the big issues with these fragrances? Now, we all know Joe Pomme was the pioneering of the mainstream gourmand. Well, Cool Water was starting to have the aquatic scent, and at first they got a lot of florals, and they got the patchouli and the different notes in here with the seawater, so they could make a good aquatic that would actually work in a lot of skin. They wanted to get it into a deep fragrance. But Cool Water is one of those things. Some people will like it, and some people will think it smells like an air freshener. Because to some people, Cool Water is a cheap smell. But this is where, like, Zino Davidoff did do a good job with Cool Water, because Cool Water does have a reasonable amount of sillage and a good smell. Now, this is the same thing where Joe Pomme pioneered to making the mainstream gourmand into fragrances. And throughout the 90s, then you had your fresh and then your gourmandish. And then, you'd also have your woody aromatic, which was more, in my mind, is more in that citrus fresh stage. Because a lot of times you have a certain amount of woods, but you have a lot of fresh notes in these fragrances. And now, wood and citrus is one note that will oftentimes tie a lot of things together, and it's used to bind stuff. Like when Robes talks about 1 million, and Katie Puckrick mentions this, they talk about the blood orange. She says it's not there. Robe says it is. Well, the thing about it is, there's a lot of fragrances that'll have notes that you can't smell, but they're used behind something else to help boost it. And you can never know what kind of oil they have. Like, this is where I also say to people, if you have a fragrance that is not strong enough, go get a scented oil version, like the roll-on oils. Some of those can work well and some of them don't. Like, the scented oils are actually highly creative. But this is where, like, when you go to a scent shop with the scented oils, you learn that there's no telling how something's going to smell just because of the notes. Because you can have some very pungent sandalwood, some sensual sandalwood, some sandalwood and patchouli that is extremely, like, what the hell? It's like strong, almost like, an ethnic restaurant smell. And then some of this patchouli is very sensual and metaphysical. It really depends on how the notes are used. And so this is where the 80s pushed the envelope. And the 80s is where they had a lot of strong, macho, rich fragrances. And then they started working on the sweet and freshness in the 90s, and they took away from the 80s. So I honestly gravitate to the 80s scents. And now, the 80s took better scent notes of a lot of things. And then a lot of the 80s scents, sadly, have been reformulated and destroyed by today's standards to the point that, you may like something from the 80s, and then you get the new version, it's like, what the hell? So, this is one thing. Like, I got the Boss #1 from the 80s. I got Montana Parfum de Homme. I've got Joe Pomme. I've got a bunch of 80s scents. And Giorgio Beverly Hills. To me, that's, the kind of powerhouse of the 80s and does a good job for what it's supposed to do, because it's not like today's fragrances. So, the 80s does a great job for vintage. And I definitely recommend it if you're an older person, if you really want to smell different but have a good enigmatic scent. Go for the 80s, because the 80s does a good job with macho fragrances. And, if you like dirty English, definitely look into some of the 80s scents. Get vials, test them out, because they're always worthy of checking. Like, you get the macho Coros before they made body Coros. And the body Coros is the more modern, gourmandish, rich, king of the gourmands, really. And then you got the Coros, which is the what the hell to some people, and it's like the gem to others. So definitely the 80s is a love it or hate it kind of fragrance era, because some people are just ready for it to be over, and some people love this stuff. So, basically, I wanted to bring this up, and thanks for watching.